the gleaming hall and the worn coat. Arthur Finch plucked at a phantom speck on his pristine uniform. Light, splintered through the lofty stained glass, splashed the Hall of Order in a riot of color. He adjusted his tie, the Windsor not impeccable, then caught his reflection in a burnished sconce. Each dawn demanded a performance, a silent bid for elevation beyond mere attendant. He daydreamed of council seats, of issuing decrees instead of dusting banisters. His gaze swept the entrance, a majestic tableau of marble and carved oak, anticipating the customary stream of supplicants, tradesmen, and lesser dignitaries. The air vibrated with a subtle energy, a low-frequency hum of aspiration. Shoulders squared, he prepared to greet them with carefully calibrated respect or disdain. Then he noticed the figure. Just inside the massive doors, a man stood silhouetted against the radiant morning. He was advanced in years, careworn, his face a roadmap of hardship and fortitude. However, it wasn't his age that seized Arthur's attention, it was his coat. Clearly time-battered. Faded, mended with disparate scraps, it seemed to have weathered decades of storms. It draped his frame loosely, offering meager defense against the crisp air. Amidst the sea of impeccable silks and furs that defined the hall, it was an oddity, a discordant note in the symphony of affluence. Arthur's lip almost imperceptibly tilted downward. Another petitioner, no doubt, angling for charity or influence. He steeled himself for an irksome exchange. "Good morning," he offered, his tone carefully measured, though a thread of impatience ran beneath. "May I assist you?" The man turned, his eyes an arresting shade of blue against his time-worn features. They possessed a depth that momentarily discomposed Arthur, a silent understanding that seemed to penetrate his starched exterior and curated demeanor. He spoke with a quiet dignity that defied his worn appearance. "I believe I have an engagement." Arthur arched a skeptical brow. "An engagement? With whom, precisely?" He mentally sifted through the day's appointments, dismissing the man as he spoke. Surely such an unprepossessing individual wasn't on the docket. "Judge Elmsworth," the man replied steadily. Arthur suppressed a scoff. Elmsworth, the council's most exacting and influential member, famed for his faultless taste and aversion to anything less than refined? Unthinkable. He glanced at the register, nonetheless. There, in Elmsworth's precise calligraphy, was the name, Silas McKinley. He double-checked, a sliver of apprehension undermining his initial judgment. "Name?" Arthur inquired, already knowing but needing confirmation. "Silas McKinley." The keen blue eyes held firm. Arthur swallowed, his throat suddenly parched. He manufactured a cordial smile, though it felt strained and artificial. "Ah, Mr. McKinley. My apologies. Please, be seated. I shall inform Judge Elmsworth of your arrival." Pivoting sharply, his polished boots echoed on the marble, he hurried towards the council chambers, a knot of disquiet tightening in his gut. He couldn't dispel the sensation that he had committed a profound error, and that its repercussions might extend further than he could possibly foresee. The Hall of Order suddenly felt less radiant, less inviting, less under his control. A misdirection and a quiet inquiry. Arthur Finch observed the elderly gentleman's approach, the rustle of his weathered coat against the polished marble echoing like windblown leaves across a paved yard. "Lost, Gramps," he drawled, a sneer subtly warping his mouth. Judge Elmsworth's summons had been the main topic in the Hall of Order since dawn. Arthur knew exactly who this was. But an inexplicable irritation at any disruption to the hall's rigid order drove him to play a game. "I'm here to see Judge Elmsworth," Silas declared, his voice a low rasp, yet surprisingly firm. Arthur tented his fingers, feigning an air of utter indifference. "Elmsworth? Basement level. Records. All the answers you need are down there." He flicked his hand carelessly towards a dim, cramped passageway that reeked of mildew and decaying paper, a world apart from the pristine grandeur above. Silas' brow furrowed in confusion. "The records office? I was told to come for the veteran ceremony." He gripped a folded document tighter, the paper crinkling in his gnarled hand. A scoff escaped Arthur, bouncing off the high ceiling. "Veteran ceremony? Wrong place, Pop." It's by invitation only. You're likely after the public gallery. Back the way you came, then left at the fountain." He waved him off, already meticulously buffing a spotless section of the counter. But Silas remained rooted to the spot, a pocket of quiet dignity amidst Arthur's swirling contempt. The harsh overhead lights painted stark, elongated shadows, exaggerating his frailty, yet a certain unyielding quality shone through. "Perhaps," Silas responded, his tone even, "I wasn't explicit. I have an appointment with Judge Elmsworth to participate in the day's event." He extended the folded paper, but Arthur pointedly ignored it. A prickle of sweat surfaced on Arthur's forehead. He'd envisioned an easy dismissal, a mumbled apology, a hasty retreat. This wasn't unfolding as planned. "Listen," Arthur began, his earlier confidence faltering. "Elmsworth is tied up. Immensely. There's clearly been a mistake. Just go to records. They'll sort it all out." He averted his gaze, busying himself with the ornate carvings above the entrance. He could feel the silent scrutiny of the other attendants, an unseen jury. Still, Silas stood his ground, unmoving. "Could you perhaps direct me to the correct entrance for the ceremony? Or, failing that, inform Judge Elmsworth of my arrival?" His words were soft, yet resonated with an undeniable insistence. The old man wasn't budging. A witness to injustice. Maria paused by the potted areca palm, its front a feathery screen between her and the lobby's entrance. From this vantage point, she watched Arthur Finch, his starched uniform gleaming under the chandelier light, address a visitor. Or rather, dismiss him. The man, Silas McKinley, was old, his coat threadbare, pulled tight against his frame as if warding off an invisible chill. His face, etched with deep lines, spoke of hardship, but his eyes, though weary, held a spark of intelligence and something else. Dignity. Arthur, leaning against the information desk with an air of bored superiority, gestured dismissively toward the far end of the hall. "Judge Elmsworth's chambers are that way. Down the corridor, third door on the left. But he's a busy man. I doubt he's seeing anyone without an appointment." Maria's jaw tightened. She knew perfectly well that Judge Elmsworth was expecting Mr. McKinley. They'd spoken about it just this morning. The judge had been eagerly anticipating their meeting. Silas shifted, his worn leather shoes scuffing softly against the marble floor. "He asked me to come. Said he had some questions about an old case." His voice was raspy, barely a whisper, yet it carried a weight that seemed to settle in the grand hall. Arthur stifled a yawn, a gesture Maria found infuriatingly condescending. "Well, like I said, he's a busy man. Maybe he forgot. Or maybe you've got the wrong day." He punctuated his words with a condescending smile. Maria could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. It wasn't just the rudeness, it was the blatant disrespect, the way Arthur sized up Mr. McKinley, judging him on his appearance, on his obvious lack of wealth. It was an injustice, plain and simple. She straightened, pushing away from the palm, her heels clicking sharply on the marble as she approached. "Arthur," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I believe Judge Elmsworth is expecting Mr. McKinley." Arthur straightened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Maria, I was just..." Making sure Mr. McKinley knew where to go, she finished for him, her eyes meeting his. She saw the flicker of understanding, the realization that he'd been caught out. Turning to Silas, she offered a warm smile. "Mr. McKinley, please forgive the confusion. Judge Elmsworth is very much looking forward to seeing you. If you'll follow me, I'll escort you to his chambers." Silas's eyes, previously clouded with uncertainty, cleared. A hint of gratitude flickered within them. "Thank you, Miss Rodriguez. Maria Rodriguez. It's my pleasure." She gestured for him to precede her, her hand lightly touching his arm as she guided him towards the corridor. "Judge Elmsworth was just mentioning your name this morning. He's eager to hear what you have to say." As they walked, Maria slowed her pace to match his, her anger at Arthur slowly dissipating, replaced by a quiet determination. She would ensure that Mr. McKinley received the respect he deserved, that his voice, no matter how faint, was heard. She glanced back at Arthur, a silent promise in her eyes. She would not stand idly by while injustice prevailed. The Hall of Heroes. "My sincerest apologies, Mr. McKinley," Maria said, her voice a warm balm after Arthur's dismissive snort. "Arthur, here, sometimes forgets we have guests besides the usual petitioners. Judge Elmsworth is expecting you. This way, please." She turned, her dark hair swinging gently, and gestured for Silas to follow. He cast one last, narrowed look at Arthur, whose face remained stubbornly impassive, before trailing after Maria. She moved with a quiet grace, her heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor, leading him away from the cramped reception area and down a wide corridor lined with portraits. "Arthur isn't usually so prickly," Maria offered, glancing back at him. "He's just very protective of the judge, especially today. It's the annual Veterans Appreciation Ceremony. Everyone who's anyone will be there." Silas raised an eyebrow. "Veterans Appreciation Ceremony? I thought Judge Elmsworth only handled civil cases." Maria smiled. "He does. But he also served, many years ago. He rarely speaks of it, though. Very humble man." She paused before a set of massive, ornate double doors. "This is it. The Hall of Heroes." With a flourish, she pushed the doors open. The sheer scale of the room took Silas's breath away. It wasn't at all what he had imagined. Arthur's offhand remark about petitioners and dusty files had conjured a picture of a small, bureaucratic office. This was anything but. Sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows depicting scenes of valor and sacrifice. Banners emblazoned with military insignias hung from the high, vaulted ceiling. Rows of neatly arranged chairs faced a raised dais, where a handful of dignitaries were already seated. The air hummed with a low murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the rustle of expensive fabrics. Silas felt acutely aware of his worn suit and the lines etched on his face. He was an intruder in this world of polished shoes and practiced smiles. Maria seemed to sense his hesitation. "Don't worry, Mr. McKinley. You belong here as much as anyone." She led him further into the hall, navigating the throng of formally dressed men and women with an ease that suggested she was a regular fixture in such gatherings. As they approached the dais, a man in a crisp uniform, adorned with medals, caught sight of them and beamed. "Maria! Wonderful to see you. And you must be Mr. McKinley. Judge Elmsworth mentioned you were coming." He extended a hand. "General Harding, retired." "A pleasure." Silas shook his hand, surprised by the man's warmth. "Silas McKinley. Welcome, welcome. Glad you could make it. Elmsworth is over there, chatting with the mayor. He'll be delighted to see you." Harding clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't let Arthur from the front desk scare you off. He thinks he's guarding Fort Knox." Maria chuckled. "He means well, General." She turned to Silas. "I should get back to my duties. Judge Elmsworth will find you. Enjoy the ceremony." With a final, reassuring smile, she melted back into the crowd. Silas stood for a moment, taking in the scene. This wasn't the encounter he had envisioned. He had expected to plead his case in some dimly lit office, not to be ushered into a room filled with decorated veterans and powerful figures. The weight of what he was about to ask Judge Elmsworth suddenly felt heavier, amplified by the grandeur surrounding him. Peeking through the doorway, a pit formed in Arthur's stomach. He hadn't intended to be so curt. Silas McKinley, in his disheveled suit and diffident manner, seemed utterly out of place. A lost tourist, perhaps. Arthur excused his behavior as simple pragmatism, preventing a potential security risk. Yet, the image of the elderly man's slumped shoulders, the downward turn of his gaze, haunted him. A nagging sense of obligation, he reasoned, steered him toward the grand hall. He had to know what was happening, ensure protocol was followed. The music swelled, a baroque flourish highlighted by the delicate chime of a harpsichord. The air crackled with anticipation. Arthur edged down the hallway, the thick carpet swallowing the sound of his approach. He reached the imposing entrance, its heavy oak frame a testament to justice and courage, rendered in meticulous carvings. Gathering his resolve, he flattened himself against the cool stone and stole a glance inside. The scene before him struck him like a physical blow. The hall blazed with light, the crystal chandeliers scattering a dazzling array of reflections. But it wasn't the sheer extravagance that captivated him, it was the tableau unfolding before him. Silas McKinley was the epicenter of a throng, each person vying for a moment of his time. And not just any individuals. These were the Bureau's elite, Director Holloway, her face illuminated by a genuine smile, Judge Thompson, his habitually severe features softened with warmth, even Ms. Chen, the notoriously icy head of security, was offering a respectful nod. He noticed Ms. Chen touch Silas's arm. They listened intently to his words, their expressions a complex blend of awe and gratitude. Arthur strained to discern their exchange, but the hall's acoustics transformed the conversation into an unintelligible hum. He observed Silas gesturing with surprising vigor, his previous timidity completely absent. A subtle change had taken root in his demeanor, a newfound assurance radiating outwards. The rumpled suit no longer appeared slovenly, but rather like a well-worn uniform, donned with understated pride. Arthur's eyes gravitated towards a table overflowing with medals and accolades. They shimmered under the chandelier's glow, each a silent narrative of exceptional service. He recognized several: the Medal of Valor, the Star of Bravery, the Distinguished Service Cross. Honors rarely bestowed, reserved only for acts of unparalleled heroism. He watched Director Holloway fasten one to Silas's lapel, her lips forming what Arthur presumed were words of congratulation. An eruption of applause followed. The warmth reflected in their faces wasn't mere pleasantry. It was genuine respect, admiration, even veneration. They treated Silas McKinley as a brother in arms, a legend returned. A sickening wave of nausea swept over Arthur. Heat flooded his face, a stinging tide of shame. His judgment of Silas had been catastrophically wrong. More than just condescending, he'd been utterly oblivious. Oblivious to the quiet signs, the unyielding strength within the man's gaze, the faint network of scars etched upon his weathered hands. He recoiled from the doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stumbled back down the corridor, the echoes of applause pursuing him. He needed to escape, to vanish into the background. He needed to comprehend how he could have been so profoundly mistaken. A soldier's story unveiled. Colonel Abernathy adjusted the microphone, the small squeal momentarily piercing the respectful silence. He cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd, a mix of uniformed personnel, town locals, and the quiet contingent from the retirement home. Silas sat stiffly to his left, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the makeshift stage. "We are gathered here today," Abernathy began, his voice resonating with authority, "not just to acknowledge service, but to celebrate extraordinary courage, selfless dedication, and unwavering commitment to duty. We are here to honor a hero amongst us." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Sergeant Silas McKinley." A smattering of polite applause rippled through the audience. Silas remained motionless. Abernathy opened the thick file in front of him, its pages filled with commendations, citations, and official reports. Sergeant McKinley's military career spans 2 decades, a period marked by exceptional performance and unwavering loyalty. He served with distinction in multiple theaters, earning numerous accolades, including the Bronze Star for Valor, the Purple Heart, and the Army Commendation Medal. He looked up, his eyes meeting Silas's for a fleeting moment. But these medals, these citations, only tell a fraction of the story. They cannot fully capture the man behind the uniform, the soldier who repeatedly put himself in harm's way for the sake of his comrades. Abernathy shuffled through the papers, his fingers lingering on a particular document. He took a deep breath. During his 3rd tour in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, in the summer of 2008, Sergeant McKinley's unit, a reconnaissance platoon, was ambushed in a narrow mountain pass. The enemy, heavily armed and entrenched in the high ground, unleashed a devastating barrage of fire. He paused, the only sound the gentle rustle of the wind through the nearby trees. The platoon was pinned down, taking heavy casualties. Communication lines were severed. All seemed lost. Abernathy's voice deepened, taking on a somber tone. It was then that Sergeant McKinley, without hesitation, took charge. Under intense fire, he single-handedly assaulted the enemy positions, creating a diversion that allowed his surviving comrades to regroup and establish a defensive perimeter. He continued, his voice gaining strength. But his bravery didn't end there. Realizing that several wounded soldiers were trapped in the kill zone, Sergeant McKinley, again braving the withering fire, repeatedly exposed himself to rescue them, dragging them to safety, administering first aid, and providing crucial support. Abernathy looked up from the file, his gaze fixed on Silas. Sergeant McKinley's actions that day were nothing short of miraculous. He not only saved the lives of his comrades, but he also prevented the complete annihilation of his unit. His courage, his selflessness, his unwavering dedication to duty are a testament to the finest qualities of a soldier. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. The official report concludes that without Sergeant McKinley's extraordinary heroism, there would have been no survivors. A hush fell over the crowd. The only sound was the distant drone of a passing airplane. Even Silas seemed to stir, his gaze shifting from the distant horizon to rest on Abernathy's face. Abernathy closed the file with a soft thud. Sergeant McKinley, your actions that day, and throughout your distinguished career, have brought great credit upon yourself, the United States Army, and the nation you so bravely served. We are eternally in your debt. He stepped forward and extended his hand. Thank you, Sergeant. The weight of regret. Flickering lamplight painted elongated, jiving shadows across the walls of Arthur's study, their exaggerated motions a cruel parody of mirth. He hadn't bothered with a fire, the room's chill mirrored the icy knot in his gut. The lukewarm tea sloshed listlessly in his cup, the faint chime a lonely sound in the hushed space. A stinging clarity pierced through him now. Silas. Stooped and aged Silas, with that diffident voice and the subtle tremor in his hands. Silas, dismissed as a senile fool, a relic irrelevant to the present. The condescending smirk he'd worn, the curtness in his voice, each recollection was a tiny, venomous dart. He pictured Silas's gaze, the momentary steel that had flashed when Arthur cut him off. He dismissed it as mere pique, the grumbling of an old man interrupted. Now, he recognized it, the suppressed fury of a seasoned warrior forced to endure the patronizing air of an ignorant upstart. The report lay open on his desk, stark pronouncements blurring through the fog of Arthur's shame. Highly decorated. Crimson Star recipient. Numerous citations for valor above and beyond. Silas. The Silas he had treated with such appalling disrespect. Arthur slammed the cup down, the sharp report shattering the silence. He rose and began to pace, the floorboards groaning a mournful tune to the storm raging in his mind. Blinded by his own arrogance, so certain of his superior insight, he hadn't even bothered to truly see the man before him. He'd judged Silas on appearance, on age, on subdued manners. Prejudice had fueled his actions, betraying the very ideals he professed: fairness, justice, and respect for all. Regret, a heavy shroud, settled over him, a weight that suffocated. More than mere embarrassment, it was a profound moral collapse. He had failed as both a judge and a man. He halted his pacing, gazing out the window at the inky void of night. A shard of moon peeked through the clouds, draping the snow-laden roofs in a pale, spectral light. It offered no solace, no redemption. Only the stark truth of his culpability. He knew what was required. It wouldn't undo the damage he'd caused, but it was the only path toward something resembling amends. He had to apologize. He had to seek out Silas and offer a sincere, heartfelt contrition. Acknowledge his failing and somehow, in some small way, begin to atone. The prospect of facing Silas filled him with a deep dread, yet beneath it, a fragile ember of hope flickered. Perhaps he could salvage a fraction of the respect he had so carelessly squandered. Turning from the window, resolve stiffened his face. He would find Silas tomorrow. He would meet the consequences of his hubris. And he would do everything within his power to lighten the crushing burden of his regret. Words of wisdom and forgiveness. The recess bell sliced through the murmur of the courtroom. Arthur watched Silas McKinley rise stiffly from his chair, his hand brushing against the tarnished silver star pinned to his lapel. Arthur had avoided him all morning, busying himself with papers he didn't need to read, whispering instructions to Amelia that could have waited. But the guilt, a sour knot in his stomach, wouldn't allow him to continue. He waited until Silas was alone near the water fountain, the fluorescent lights reflecting harshly off his thinning hair. He approached hesitantly, his palms sweating. "Mr. McKinley." Silas turned, his eyes, usually crinkled in a perpetual near smile, were guarded. "Mr. Finch." The tone was polite, but cool, a clear indication that Arthur's behavior had not gone unnoticed. Arthur swallowed. I wanted to apologize." The words felt clumsy, inadequate. He shuffled his feet, avoiding Silas's gaze. For how I've acted this morning. It was unprofessional. And unfair." He finally looked up. Silas's expression remained unchanged, an unreadable mask. Arthur rushed on, the words tumbling out. "I made assumptions. Because of your age. And other things. I wasn't giving you the respect you deserved. I was condescending, and frankly, prejudiced. And I'm truly sorry." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Arthur braced himself for a reprimand, a well-deserved dressing down. Instead, Silas sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Apology accepted, Mr. Finch." He reached out a hand, surprisingly firm for a man his age. Arthur shook it, the brief contact a small measure of relief. Silas released his hand and leaned slightly against the cool tile wall. "You know, son, during the war," he paused, his gaze drifting, lost in a distant memory. "We were all terrified. Young men, barely more than boys, thrown into situations no one could imagine. And fear makes you judge. You look at the man next to you, and you try to figure out if he's going to crack, if he's going to get you killed. You categorize people. You build walls. It's a survival mechanism, I suppose." He looked back at Arthur, his eyes clear and surprisingly gentle. "But after a while, you realize those walls, they keep you from seeing the good in people. They blind you to their strengths, their courage. They make you a lesser man." Silas pushed himself upright. "It took me a long time to learn that. Don't let it take you as long, Mr. Finch. Everyone has something to offer, something to teach. Even an old man like me." He gave Arthur a small, almost imperceptible smile, a ghost of the warmth Arthur had seen before. The recess bell rang again, a shrill summons back to the courtroom. Silas straightened his jacket. "Now, shall we get back to it? I believe we have a case to win." He turned and walked back towards the courtroom, leaving Arthur standing by the water fountain, the cold tiles suddenly feeling grounding beneath his feet. The knot in his stomach had loosened, replaced by a different kind of discomfort, a shame that felt almost cleansing. He had a lot to learn. A changed perspective. The silence in the car was thick enough to choke on. Arthur stared out the window, the blur of the passing landscape mirroring the turmoil in his mind. He'd expected anger, resentment, at least a cutting remark. But Silas had simply forgiven him. It was unsettling. Humiliating, almost. I don't understand," Arthur finally stammered, his voice rough. "Why aren't you furious?" "I was insufferable." Silas chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Furious? Mr. Finch, I've been called worse by better. Besides," he added, turning to look at Arthur, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." Arthur frowned. "That's surprisingly profound." Silas smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Comes with the territory. You see a lot in this line of work." He paused, then said, "Reminds me of a fella I knew back in my days on the force. Bookie named Fingers to Flanagan. Scrawny little guy, always wore the same stained raincoat. Everyone thought he was just some pathetic lowlife scraping by. He continued, "One day, there was a robbery down at the docks. A couple of stevedores got roughed up pretty bad. Fingers was the one who called it in, stayed with them until the ambulance arrived. Turns out, he'd been a medic in Vietnam. Saved those fellas' lives." Silas shook his head slowly. "Never judge a book by its cover, Mr. Finch. You never know what kind of story it holds." Arthur felt a flush creep up his neck. The analogy was painfully clear. He'd seen Silas's age, his unassuming appearance, and immediately relegated him to the role of a doddering old fool. He hadn't seen the experience, the wisdom, the quiet strength that lay beneath. He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to speak. "I was wrong, Silas. Terribly wrong. I apologize. Sincerely." Silas nodded, accepting the apology with grace. "Water under the bridge, Mr. Finch. We all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them." He patted Arthur on the arm. "Now, about this attendant case." Arthur took a deep breath. The air felt cleaner somehow, the weight on his chest lighter. He looked at Silas, really looked at him, and saw not an old man to be tolerated, but a man of experience, of quiet dignity, a partner. He knew he couldn't undo his past behavior, but he could change his future. He could choose to be more compassionate, more understanding, less quick to judge. It wouldn't be easy, old habits died hard, but he was determined to try. The rest of the drive passed in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional question from Arthur about the case. He listened intently to Silas's observations, his insights, his thoughtful analysis of the evidence. He realized he had almost dismissed valuable advice and insight that would have been crucial to his own career. As they pulled up to the attendant facility, Arthur got out of the car and held the door open for Silas. "Ready to get back to work?" he asked, a genuine smile on his face. Silas returned the smile. "Always, Mr. Finch. Always." Arthur took another deep breath, the scent of pine trees and damp earth filling his lungs. He walked alongside Silas toward the imposing building, a newfound respect blossoming in his heart. He still didn't fully understand Silas McKinley, but he was beginning to see the man beneath the surface. And he was determined to learn everything he could.